Good morning. We're just going to go ahead and pick up here where we left off in last week's lesson on Judah Part 2. You can go back and listen to Part 1 and Part 2. We need to get through this Amos chapter 2 verses 4 and 5 with the judgment upon Judah. So this morning in Part 3, and we'll move along to the prophesied judgments upon Judah per the prophecy of Amos, speaking poetic posture on God's behalf. In the last lesson, we talked about the lies of the fathers of Judah and talked a little bit about Judah substituting God for popular idols and all things pagan. And we went over some examples of lies of today's generation's fathers and the popular idols and pagan entities that humanity holds stock in today, yesterday, every generation from now back historically to the human habit in defiance of God in the ancient Eastern culture back in the days of Judah. So let's conclude Part 3 of Amos chapter 2 verses 4 and 5. Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Judah and for 4, I will not turn away its punishment, because they have despised the law of the Lord and have kept not his commandments. Their lies led them astray, lies which their fathers followed. But I will send a fire upon Judah, and it shall devour the palaces of Jerusalem. Now, we haven't talked at great length in parts 1 and 2 of Judah despising the law of the Lord and keeping not of his commandments. But the opportunity, I feel, has been saved for now, as we'll speak here of the fire upon Judah and the palaces of Jerusalem being destroyed for their not keeping the commandments and despising God's laws. And as God's chosen people, they had a particular set of commandments and laws to serve as ambassadors of the God back in the ancient East, the Creator God. So the Bible, God's Word pertaining to the Judah in Amos's lifetime, the Old Testament we call it, it was called the Torah then. Many did not live to see and read what we call the New Testament. But they had the Old Testament, the Torah. They knew how to live. But they had, well, for instance, one out of hundreds of verses along the lines of Deuteronomy 28, verse 9. The Lord will establish you as a holy people to himself, as he swore to you, if you keep the commandments and his statutes of the Lord your God, and walk in his ways. And they had verses such as the language in Leviticus chapter 20, verses 20 through 23. You shall therefore keep all my statutes and all my judgments, and do them, that the land whither I bring you to dwell therein spew you not out. And ye shall not walk in the manners of the nation which I cast out before you. For they committed all these things, and therefore I have abhorred them. So as we went over in part 2, God exclusively was just not enough for Judah. They wanted a physical, tangible God that they could interact with their 5 senses. They could see it, they could touch it. So the commandments and laws then were for that exclusive chosen people of God then. The circumcision, the civil laws, the dietary laws, feast days and such. The 10 Commandments. And we today in this new heaven and new earth, that's a lesson, an in-depth lesson for another day. We'll just call it, we today in this new covenant era can cover a multitude and enormous category of commandments and laws in this era of Jesus reigning by simply asking Jesus for forgiveness, repenting of the transgressions of the old man, that old nature of ours, and by knocking, seeking, and asking for the Spirit of Christ to take up residence in your being, in your heart, and following just 2 commandments, like I said, that covers a multitude of laws and commandments. See, the Israel of the Old Testament, they had the law of Moses, the 10 Commandments, and 600 and some other statutes. We do not have today feast days and temple laws, sabbatical years, dietary laws. Unfortunately, though, we do have a couple of idols, and one of them's a bunny rabbit that lays eggs and an old man with diabetes that flies reindeer to the houses of the nice and bypasses the naughty. So Jesus says, in this new covenant, that we are to love the Lord God with all of our heart, with all of our soul, and with all of our mind. That's the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like unto it. We are to love our neighbor as ourselves. Our neighbors. Members of humanity. That we run across in our lives. If you love God, if you love your neighbor as yourself, those 2 commandments, you will not murder. You will not steal. You won't be a praying pervert and cheat on your spouse. In other words, you won't commit adultery. You'll honor your father and mother. Respect your elders. You will not covet others' goods, their possessions, and you'll be happy and humble with what you've got. If you love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and other people as you do yourself, you will not worship things and celebrities and athletes over your Creator God. Humanity then, till now, has changed the truth of God into a lie. They have worshipped and served the creature over the Creator. As God is the potter and mankind as the clay, just what does God do with such as He has created? Well, Paul has something to say about that in Romans chapter 1, verses 26 through 32. Let me go here real quick. For this reason, God gave them up to vile passions. For even their women exchanged the natural use for what is against nature. Likewise, also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust for one another, men with men, committing what is shameful, and receiving in themselves the penalty of their error, which was due. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind, to do those things which are not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness, being filled with sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness. They are whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful, who, knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do the same, but also approve of those who practice them. And God allowed Judah to waller in their idols and paganism for despising the law of the Lord, for not keeping the commandments, and for believing the lies, boycotting God, and believing the lies which their fathers followed. So back in Jesus' day, it was not popular to follow Jesus. I mean, you look at today, how the uncontrolled paranoia of humanity strives so hard to be cool and fit in with the popular cliques and try and not be a separated people, a distinct people from others. And then after selling out their genuine character just to fit in with certain people, those same people, friends they call them, they turn on you. They throw you under the bus, so to speak. So let me read here. The unpopular manner in which people were that followed Christ back then, and the consequences for following Jesus amid all the persecution. Here in Matthew chapter 10, verses 16 through 23. This is what would happen if you were a follower of Christ. Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore be wise as serpents, and harmless as doves. But beware of men, for they will deliver you up to councils, and scourge you in their synagogues. You will be brought before governors and kings for my name's sake, as a testimony to them and to the Gentiles. But when they deliver you up, do not worry about how or what you should speak, for it will be given to you in that hour what you should speak. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father who speaks in you. Now, brother will deliver up brother to death, and a father his child, and children will rise up against parents and cause them to be put to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake. But he who endures to the end will be saved. When they persecute you in this city, flee to another. For assuredly I say to you, you will not have gone through the cities of Israel before the Son of Man comes. So we today, as Judah, sold out to God in order to submit to people, local nations, idols of significance. We follow man's laws today, right? We can break the Bible commandments, but we're following the laws of man. We're staying out of jail. All right. So Judah was to be judged, and they were by King Nebuchadnezzar. Jerusalem was destroyed, and the first temple, the one that Solomon built, was destroyed. And that account can be read in 2 Kings 25, Jeremiah 52, and some other books of the Bible have those accounts. So Amos chapter 2, verse 5. But I will send a fire upon Judah, and it shall devour the palaces of Jerusalem. Like I said, those accounts can be read in 2 Kings 25, Jeremiah 52, and other places. Do a little research and look that up. But right now, this morning, I'll press upon Jeremiah 52, verses 4 through 16, that gives an account of this destruction. Now it came to pass in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, on the 10th day of the month, that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and all his army came against Jerusalem and encamped against it. And they built a siege wall against it all around. So the city was besieged until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. But by the 4th month, on the 9th day of the month, the famine had become so severe in the city that there was no food for the people of the land. Then the city wall was broken through, and all the men of war fled and went out of the city at night by the way of the gate between the two walls, which was by the king's garden, even though the Chaldeans were near the city all around. And they went by way of the plain. But the army of the Chaldeans pursued the king, and they overtook Zedekiah in the plains of Jericho. All his army was scattered from him. So they took the king and brought him up to the king of Babylon at Riblah, in the land of Hamath, and he pronounced judgment on him. Then the king of Babylon killed the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, and he killed all the princes of Judah in Riblah. He also put out the eyes of Zedekiah. And the king of Babylon bound him in bronze fetters, took him to Babylon, and put him in prison till the day of his death. Now in the 5th month, on the 10th day of the month, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, who served the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He burned the house of the Lord and the king's house, all the houses of Jerusalem, that is, all the houses of the great. He burned with fire. And all the army of the Chaldeans who were with the captain of the guard broke down all walls of Jerusalem all around. Then Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried away captive some of the poor people, the rest of the people who remained in the city, the defectors who had deserted to the king of Babylon, and the rest of the craftsmen. But Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, left some of the poor of the land as vine dressers and farmers. So they kept them as slaves. But I encourage y'all to read all of Jeremiah 52. There's a lot of temple language, things pillaged from the temple that reflects the intricacies and the perfection that the temple of God demanded. So next week we'll do the judgment upon Israel, and it consists of verse 6 of chapter 2, verse 6 all the way to verse 16, which concludes chapter 2. We'll do that next week. So the judgment on Israel will be many parts. It'll be many lessons. It's going to be quite long. So we'll do the judgment upon Israel starting next week. Till next time.